Welcome to In Conversation with MANWAR podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the Do Not Be a Bystander campaign. You can join us in raising awareness about bullying by visiting the donotbeabystander.com, and be sure to subscribe to the channel to stay informed about upcoming episodes. Today's participants are Arif and Barira. Our special guest for today's episode is Gary Simpson.
Welcome to our Bullying Awareness podcast. I'm your host, Manwar Khan. Today, I'm joined by two young individuals who are ready to share their thoughts on the topic of words matter. Words matter is a phrase that emphasizes the impact and significance of language we use. It highlights the idea that the words we choose can have a profound effect on others, both positively and negatively. Today's participants are Barira and Arif. Thank you, Barira and Arif, for joining us today.
Thank you for having
Thanks.
us.
Thanks.
You're welcome. And before we continue, I would like to introduce our special guest for today's podcast, Gary Simpson. Gary is an ordained minister and a semi-retired teacher counselor. He is an activist and volunteer with Stop Hate 2000, which is a group that works to reduce prejudice, discrimination, bullying, and hate. Just so you know, you guys, I'm not from Edmonton, and Gary is pretty famous in Edmonton. All right. Gary will shed some lights on this topic today once you guys are done with your ad responses. And now that I've introduced our participants and guests, let's get started with the question. So the power of words is undeniable. They have the ability to shape our thoughts, evoke emotions, and leaving lasting impressions. So Arif, my question for you is, how do words have the power to influence our thoughts and feelings? And can you think of a time when someone's words made you feel happy or encouraged?
Thank you for the question. The first thing that comes to my mind is I think the time in school, in particular when I was struggling in electronics class, and my professor was helping me. It was very difficult for me to grasp the concepts, and like my friends were making fun of me that okay, he doesn't know simple things. So when we were doing practical stuff, for example soldering a circuit and things like that, so I was not the best at it. But obviously my professor was very encouraging, and he was very kind, and he actually made an effort to say the right words that like gave me hope that I could also do it. And rather than me like thinking of dropping out and not taking that class because I was like, oh, I can't do it because I'm a failure, he actually utilized like words and actions as well at the same time, so that I could feel empowered. And he gave me that space to make mistakes, and lifted my spirits up, and I was actually good at electronics class afterwards. So that is something that instantly came to my mind.
Great answer. And it's a wonderful example. Thank you, Arif. So using our words to support and encourage our friends and families can have a positive and uplifting effect on their well-being, just like example Arif gave. So my question for Barira is, what are some ways we can use our words to support and encourage our friends and families?
Well, there are several ways to actually do that. But to summarize it all, I think it's very important as family for the adults to let the children know, since we are talking about being bullied or the victims of it, or how bullies are not supposed to be or behave the way they do. As families, what we can do is, if the parents notice that the children come back home and they look sad or depressed every single day, they can sit them down, ask them how their day went, and if they're facing any trouble at school, because usually at the time when cyberbullying or bullying is happening in school for younger kids, they really do not know how to communicate about this with other people. So families in that case can actually uplift the children and tell them by showing them what the good qualities in them are, or by telling them how amazing they are for who they are. And even if they're a little different from the other kids for which they might be getting bullied, it should not be something that matters to them because of how much the family loves them. So these are some of the words that can be very uplifting for the child, and maybe he or she will be in a space to speak up the next day. And when it comes to friends, well, we see a lot of mostly teenage people who go through a lot of insecurities, which are also picked on at school or through social media. So when it comes to friends, it's always good to have company that really uplift your energy whenever something drags you down. And it's not only just limited to teenage life at school. Sometimes it can be carried on to adulthood as well. So it's very important to be surrounded by the right circle who again know how to uplift you and tell you that you are who you are and you're amazing, and that these words or these bullies or these thing hasn't should not have an effect on you, because you are you and you're great that way. So I think that's the key point, just highlighting the beauty that's inside of them.
Excellent. No, that's true. And I agree with you when you say that, yeah, there are situations that some people, when they get bullied, they internalize it. They don't say it to other people, and that actually affects their mental health. They can go to depression, they can be sad. Continuous sad can lead to the depression and all these kind of things. So it is better to share with someone you trust and talk to them. And yeah, I think that is important. Excellent. Thank you for your response, Barira. Do you have any comments or statements do you guys have you would like to add before I jump into our final segment with Gary?
No, I'm good, thank you.
All right. Now I would like to welcome our guest, Gary, to share his thoughts and insight on this topic.
Well, you are both tough acts to follow. You have so many wonderful insights to share that I really appreciate it. So I found myself making notes, not just to try to respond, but making notes because I really liked what you were saying and the ideas that you shared. It doesn't always take much to make a person's day that's been rough much better. And that can be as little as smiling at someone or saying thank you, that sort of thing. So that doesn't take much, but stopping it and thinking about doing that. Sometimes in families, because we know each other so well, we've lived with each other, we let our hair down and we say things we wish we had said. But I think a lot of this can start at home by trying to set a good example in our homes as to how to respond when people say or do things maybe we don't appreciate, to try and word it in a very kind way as opposed to a highly critical way. And I really like the example of the professor who allowed space for you to make mistakes. We can't learn without making mistakes. And the only teacher that probably has a student that doesn't make mistakes is a teacher probably needs to step to the side and let the student take over. Because there are times when students actually do know more about the topic than teachers do. There's a person on the internet who I appreciate very much. When people ask this individual for advice, sometimes it's pretty strongly worded, but at the end of each time the person gives advice, the person ends with, "You got this," which is a vote of confidence, which I really appreciate very much. "I believe in you" can be something that can be encouraging to people as well. I think the real challenge in this is, how do we take this from "I believe in you" and "you've got this," being very encouraging with people who are people very much like us, to how do we do that when the people are not like us? I go live regularly on social media, and for a while on TikTok, one of the phrases that people would say to individuals to see if they could get them angry was one of three things, one of which was, "You look Jewish," "You look Muslim," and you look trans. So what I was doing when I would respond, and I'll choose to use the Muslim example, because in Canada, Muslims are definitely a minority group and sometimes have faced persecution and discrimination because of that. I would go through and give a short little blurb, like, there have been a number of scientific discoveries and mathematical discoveries that have come from Muslim people and largely Muslim countries. And the doctors and nurses that I interact with, the specialists, medical specialists, are often Muslims, and I have Muslim colleagues at work. And I go through a number of things like that. And I say, I feel very complimented that you think I might be Muslim and might look Muslim. I'm not, I'm Christian, but I feel so complimented. Now, if I'd answered that in any other way, if the person coming into my life was asking because they were Muslim and wanted to know if they were safe in my life, they wouldn't have felt safe. If I answered in a different way, I might end up saying things that reinforce people's ideas that have caused them to hate and discriminate against Muslims. And I didn't realize that some of these responses are being recorded. So one of the people who come in and made this comment in my live recorded a whole bunch of people where he'd asked the same question. You'd see he asked the question and it gets this little blurb that comes up, "You've been blocked by the user." Over and over and over like that. Then it comes to my response, and its response is, I hope, was affirming of Muslims. And I think the person did that because they hadn't seen that kind of a response before and appreciated the response. We make that kind of a thing of, how can I make this person I'm interacting with feel safe and appreciated and respected? That's going to go a long ways. And I use the word respected because some people we interact with have never really understood what it meant to be loved, but they get what it means to be respected. And if we show respect, we've shown love.
Excellent. Thank you, Gary. Do you guys have any questions for Gary?
I have one.
Sure.
Gary, I think my thing would be you're pretty active about it right now. You know that words matter. How long did it take for you to build that kind of mindset?
Probably quite a while. Because when we're teenagers, this is a development tendency. Teenagers have very sharp, active mind, and especially male teenagers tend to enjoy giving a good insult. And it can be funny and entertaining, and I have to admit I did a lot of that when I was a teenager too. But it can deeply wound people. And I think it took me probably till maybe second or third year of college. I hate to admit it took me that long. To get to the point where I started to realize the words I'm using sometimes are causing a lot of pain, and I need to stop, because while it's funny, it's just inappropriate. It's causing pain instead of building people. So it did take me a while to learn that.
Good question. Thank you, Arif. Thank you, Gary. Any other question for Gary? Right, we have come to the end of our podcast. Thank you, Arif and Barira, for joining this podcast. And I also like to thank Gary for joining us today. I know how busy you are. You always have time for us. Thank you so much, Gary. Thank you so much for listening our today's episode. Before we wrap up, I would like to remind our listeners that there are several resources available to help individuals dealing with bullying. The Government of Alberta has a bullying helpline which provides support and advice to those who experience bullying. The helpline can be reached at 1-888-456-2323. Bullying is a violation of human rights. Under no circumstances is bullying acceptable. As a community, we have a shared responsibility to take a stand against bullying and refuse to be a bystander. Thank you for joining in conversation with MANWAR Khan, and we will see you next week. Bye, everyone.